Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Self-Care Sunday. I'm just getting myself adjusted. How is it, everyone? Welcome back if you're back. Welcome if you are new. Today is Self-Care Sunday, and today I am beginning the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. It is an exploration into creativity, and what I love about Elizabeth Gilbert is that she writes the way that she speaks. So she writes in a way that you're sitting across from her and she's just telling you this story. So it's not anything too deep or too heavy. Get your whip out, whatever it is that you're working on, whether you're diamond painting or kitting up like I'm going to be doing, or maybe you're crocheting, or maybe you're just laying in bed with a coffee this morning. I am going to be working on kitting up my jars to get them ready for the drills. That would be just too much noise. While I read you this hidden gem of a book. Maybe you know Elizabeth Gilbert from Eat, Pray, Love, The Signature of All Things, City of Girls. They're all the books of hers that I've read. I am reading off my scribe. Now, I haven't really had my hands on this too much. There's the book. This is something that John got me for my birthday because he always sees me writing notes, but here's a little cover here. I don't want to close it because then it'll shut the book. It has a pen. Pen has like little, it almost feels like a pencil, and the point, once it wears down, it actually looks like a pencil point. When it wears down, you just pop a new one in. It's really crazy. So what I do like about it is I write in all my books. You can add a note here. So if I'm teaching, if I'm telling you about this book, and then I have a little. So right behind me is my, I can't zoom for you guys, but right behind me is, John actually took downstairs Honor's picture, and there's a few of his little outfits that he used to wear. And yesterday was 2 years that he has been gone. So I brought them over to my piano, and I like him looking over my shoulder. So let's get this reading started, shall we? So here's what I'm doing. I'm going to use these new art dot containers, and I am going to be putting a piece of washi tape on top. You guys could see this, because I just find that it makes taking the labels off so much more easier. So I'm going to be using my Big Magic tape here. So I'm just going to be cutting a piece of washi tape off while I'm reading, and then tomorrow when I kit up with my members, I'm going to put the actual DMC, the number and the symbol on there. That's so pretty too. I like having that little background to the labels. So here we go. Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Hidden treasure. Once upon a time, there was a man named Jack Gilbert. I think I need some coffee. Sorry about that. Once upon a time, there was a man named Jack Gilbert who was not related to me, unfortunately for me. Jack Gilbert was a great poet, but if you've never heard of him, don't worry about it. It's not your fault. He never much cared about being known, but I knew about him, and I loved him dearly from a respectful distance. So let me tell you about him. Jack Gilbert was born in Pittsburgh in 1925 and grew up in the midst of that city's smoke, noise, and industry. Now, I love that she decided to open this book up with a memory of a man with the same last name as her, who was a great poet. But the story is it's only a few pages. It's about coincidence, and are there really any coincidences? And there's a great meaning at the end of this story. Jack Gilbert was born in Pittsburgh in 1925 and grew up in the midst of that city's smoke, noise, and industry. He worked in factories and steel mills as a young man, but was called from an early age to write poetry. He answered the call without hesitation. He became a poet the way other men become monks, as a devotional practice, as an act of love, as a lifelong commitment to the search for grace and transcendence. I need a coffee break. I think this is probably a very good way to become a poet, or to become anything really that calls to your heart and brings you to life. Jack could have been famous, but he wasn't into it. He had the talent and the charisma for fame, but he never had the interest. His first collection, published in 1962, won a prestigious Yale Younger Poets Prize and was nominated for a Pulitzer. What's more, he won over audiences as well as critics, which is not an easy feat for a poet in the modern world. Wow. There was something about him that drew people in and kept them captivated. He was handsome, passionate, sexy, brilliant on stage. I gotta look this guy up. He was a magnet for women and an idol for men. He was photographed for Vogue looking gorgeous and romantic. People were crazy about him. He could have been a rock star. Wow, go Jack. Instead, he disappeared. He didn't want to be distracted by too much commotion. Later in life, he reported that he had found his fame boring. Not because it was immoral or corrupting, but simply because it was exactly the same thing every day. I'm going to move you guys closer to what it is that I'm doing here. Okay. He was looking for something richer, more textured, more varied. So he dropped out. He went to live in Europe and stayed there for 20 years. He lived for a while in Italy, a while in Denmark, but mostly he lived in a shepherd's hut on a mountaintop in Greece. Now, I've read this book already, and I thought that the ending of this book was very much similar to The Prophet. And, oh gosh, by Gilbert. If you've never read The Prophet, what a beautiful book of poetry. And, not The Prophet, I'm sorry. The Alchemist. Well, The Prophet is also a very gorgeous book of poetry, but The Alchemist is the story of, I don't want to give it away. There he contemplated the eternal mysteries, watched the light change, and wrote poems in private. He had his love stories, his obstacles, his victories. He was happy. He got by somehow, making a living here and there. He needed little. He allowed his name to be forgotten. After 2 decades, Jack Gilbert resurfaced and published another collection of poems. Again, the literary world fell in love with him. Again, he could have been famous. Again, he disappeared. Oh, I'm going to post some pictures of Jack. I'm going to look him up. I'm going to post some pictures of him on this episode of Self-Care Sunday. Again, he disappeared, this time for a decade. This would be his pattern always. Isolation, followed by the publication of something sublime, followed by more isolation. He was like a rare orchid, with blooms separated by many years. He never promoted himself in the least. In one of the few interviews he ever gave, Gilbert was asked how he thought his detachment from the publishing world had affected his career. He laughed and said, I suppose it's been fatal. The only reason I ever heard of Jack Gilbert was that, quite late in his life, he returned to America and, for motives I will never know, took a temporary teaching position in the creative writing department at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. The following year, 2005, it happened that I took exactly the same job. Around campus, they started jokingly calling the position the Gilbert Chair. Wow, can you imagine? I mean, I joke around sometimes that I conjure people up, but there's just a power, I believe, to everything that we do, like an energy of, I think I told you guys, I don't know, maybe I was telling my members, but my girlfriend Anna, who you all know, I worked at the ink pad in New York City, and when I had returned to Philly, and Anna and I kept in touch, and Anna used to talk about it all the time. She loved Elizabeth Gilbert, and she's like, Elisa, one day she's going to come into my store. I know she's here in New York often, and she's a very creative individual, and one day she's going to come into my store, and I'm going to meet her. And sure enough, I get this text, and this is like, talk about sublime, this is Anna. And it's a text of her standing in her store with Elizabeth Gilbert. So I do believe that you just, it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but you conjure people up. So I found Jack Gilbert's books in my office, the office that had once been his. It was almost like the room was still warm from his presence. I read his poems and was overcome by their grandeur and by how much his writing reminded me of Whitman. We must risk delight, he wrote. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthfulness furnace of this world. He and I had the same surname. We held the same job. We had inhabited the same office. We had taught in many of the same students. And now I was in love with his words, naturally enough. I became deeply curious about him. I asked around, who was Jack Gilbert? Students told me he was the most extraordinary man they've ever encountered. He had seemed not quite of this world, they said. He seemed to live in a state of uninterrupted marvel, and he encouraged them to do the same. He didn't so much teach them how to write poetry, they said, but why? Because of delight. Because of stubborn gladness, he told them that they must live their most creative lives as a means of fighting back against the ruthless furnace of this world. I had that underlined. They must live their most creative lives as a means of fighting back against the ruthless furnace of this world. Most of all, though, he asked his students to be brave. Oh, gosh. How true. How true to be brave. Most of all, he asked his students to be brave. Without bravery, he instructed, they would never be able to realize the vaulting scope of their own capacities. Without bravery, they would never know the world as richly as it longs to be known. Without bravery, their lives would remain small, far smaller than they probably wanted their lives to be. I never met Jack Gilbert myself, and now he is gone. He passed away in 2012. I probably could have made it a personal mission to seek him out and meet him while he was living, but I never really wanted to. Oh boy, ain't that the truth. I didn't know. I didn't remember if she met him. I knew that she held the same position that he did. And I always get a chill up my spine thinking about someone that you admired being in the same room, teaching some of the same students and you just being an admirer of him and being able to soak his presence or even still feel his presence in that room. Experience has taught me to be careful of meeting my heroes in person. It can be terribly disappointing. Usually is. Anyway, I quite like the way he lived outside my imagination as a massive and powerful presence. Like a little muse, built out of his poems and the stories I've heard about him. So I decided to know him only that way, through my imagination. And that's where he remains for me to this day, still alive inside me, completely internalized, almost though I dreamed him up. But I will never forget what the real Jack Gilbert told someone else, an actual flesh and blood person, a shy University of Tennessee student. This young woman recounted to me that one afternoon, after his poetry class, Jack had taken her aside. He complimented her work, then asked what she wanted to do with her life. Hesitantly, she admitted that perhaps she wanted to be a writer. He smiled at her with infinite compassion and asked, "Do you have the courage? Do you have the courage to bring forth this work? The treasures that are hidden inside of you are hoping you will say yes." Now, I have come through many stories in my life where that message is always the same. I believe I may have shared with you guys from Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo, the hidden treasures beneath your feet. I believe that was the name of the page that I wrote, The Treasures Beneath Our Feet. It's the same message when it comes to having a desire to do something, but desire is one thing. There's also courage. And why this reminded me of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I get it confused with The Prophet. That's Gibran. But Paulo Coelho wrote The Alchemist, and I don't know how many languages. And usually The Alchemist is something that I read every year during the holiday season, actually. So maybe I'll put that on my book list. But The Alchemist, it was all about seeking your treasure, going out and finding your treasure. It's a very beautiful, beautiful book. And along the way, which reminds me, like, it's like, is anything... there was a movie that I was watching this week, and it was about a writer, a great writer, and one of his, again, an admirer, just like Elizabeth Gilbert, admiring Jack Gilbert from afar. There's a college student, and he is going to take a tutoring job, and it's of the son of a great writer that he admires, and the writer says to him, he knows that he wants to be a writer also, and he has like the same message for him, like that all great works are like stolen pieces of art. People like steal ideas and concepts from each other, but they make them their own story. And that's like as she's telling this story, I'm remembering so many other stories in my life that have to do with the same exact message of courage and finding that buried treasure within you. And if you know what it is already, do you have the courage to bring it forth? Creative living defined. One more sip of coffee, please. Elizabeth writes, so this, I believe, is the central question upon which all creative living hinges. Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? Didn't I just say that? Look, I don't know what's hidden within you. I have no way of knowing such a thing. You yourself may barely know, although I suspect you've caught glimpses. I don't know your capabilities, your capacities, your aspirations, your longings, your secret talents, but surely something wonderful is sheltered inside of you. I say this with all confidence because I happen to believe we are all walking repositories, turn the page, of buried treasure. I believe this is one of the oldest and most generous tricks the universe plays on us, human beings, both for its own amusement and for ours. The universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can find them. And I'm getting an image of that in my head. I used to look at my fingerprints, and unique to me, no one has my fingerprints at all, and I would look at it like a labyrinth, kind of tracing the circles on my fingertips and thinking, is this the map to my buried treasure? I do think that when something feels right to me, or wrong to me too, I get this tingling in my fingertips. It can almost make my finger, if it's something negative, it can almost make my joints of my hands hurt and feel like, no, this is wrong, like this energy, like get out of here. And I think that comes also not through any kind of special practice other than listening. Listening has been a big theme of this Self-Care Sunday, of going back to the listening path, which was the last book, of like listening to your environment, listening to yourself, listening to others, which I don't know about that one, but listening to your beloveds, listening to your heroes. We went through all of our, different ways of learning how to listen. And I think as you live a creative life, whatever it is, my creativity comes out in all different ways, as my members got a little glimpse into other parts of my creative life when I decided to create a journal for my diamond painting and share it with them, and different other mediums that I have, like of how I create a journal and an art journal, and different mediums that I use, whether it's like watercolor or stickers or rubber stamps. But I think as you create And whether it's you're creating a household, you're creating a family, you're creating a job, you're creating your future, whatever it is, the more that you stay present in what that is inside of you, that is just, swirling like a little vortex of energy as you continue to just keep that moving in the right direction. Other things, all the obstacles tend to move out of the way because you have a very clear vision about where you're going, what you want to do, what you want to test, what you want to try, what works, what doesn't work. For me, it's my fingertips. I kind of get that feeling in my hands if something is right or wrong. For you, it might be, your stomach, something in your throat. That's another big one for me. My truth is always been my voice, and when I feel stifled in some way, I can get all kind of ailments in my throat, whether it's a sore throat or feeling like there's something stuck in my throat. So I think you also begin to become very aware of what you can create also in your own body. So the universe, I believe this is one of the oldest and most generous tricks the universe plays on us human beings, both for its own amusement and for ours. The universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can find them. The hunt to uncover those jewels, that's creative living. The courage to go on that hunt in the first place, that's what separates a mundane existence from a more enchanted one. The often surprising results of that hunt, that's what I call big magic. When I talk about creative living here, please understand that I am not necessarily talking about pursuing a life that is professionally or exclusively devoted to the arts. I'm not saying that you must become a poet who lives on a mountaintop in Greece, or that you must perform at Carnegie Hall, or that you must win the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, though if you want to attempt any of these feats, by all means, have at it. I love watching people swing for the bleachers. No, when I refer to creative living, I am speaking more broadly. I'm talking about living a life that is driven more strongly by curiosity than fear. I don't know. I think in my businesses, I may have had some fear, but because you have a lot on the line, and your creativity can become blocked when it's like, well, this is everything I have in the bank, and I'm throwing it into a place where people are going to come and practice yoga or come and drink coffee, or are they going to get the concept of my idea? So yeah, that takes a lot of courage. So I think that might be the only time that I had some fear. Hesitation, but not really fear in other parts of my life. But yes, in a business, absolute fear. One of the coolest examples of creative living that I've seen in recent years, for instance, came from my friend Susan, who took up figure skating when she was 40 years old. To be more precise, she actually already knew how to skate. She had competed in figure skating as a child and had always loved it. Oh, this reminds me of I think a lot of us have that nagging of things that we enjoyed as kids, and I'm just dying to get a pair of roller skates, and but I'm afraid if I get on them, I'm never coming back. I'm just going to keep roller skating right out of this city. So Susan took up figure skating when she was 40, and she already knew how to skate. She competed in figure skating as a child. She loved it, but she quit the sport during adolescence. That happens. When it became clear she didn't have quite enough talent to be a champion. Oh my God, Susan, no. Oh, lovely adolescence, when the talented are officially shunted off the herd, thus putting the total burden of society's creative dreams on the thin shoulders of a few select souls, while condemning everyone else to live a more commonplace, inspiration-free existence. What a system. For the next quarter of a century, my friend Susan did not skate. Why bother if you can't be the best? Then she turned 40. Isn't it something how you could just, I'm thinking of Susan as an adolescent, and how someone's opinion can just squash something that you love so much. She was listless. She was restless. She felt drab and heavy. She did a little soul searching the way one does on big birthdays. She asked herself when was the last time she felt truly light, joyous, and yes, creative in her own skin. To her shock, she realized that it had been decades since she felt that way. In fact, the last time she experienced such feelings, she had been a teenager, back when she was still figure skating. She was appalled to discover that she had denied herself this life-affirming pursuit for so long. And she was curious to see if she still loved it. Of course you do. It's like riding a bike. But I'm sure part of her might feel a little foolish for different reasons. Maybe feeling like, that was me with yoga. I mean, I had someone say to me, I had one of my yoga teachers say to me, you're going to become a yoga teacher. And I thought, no, I'm not. No, not me. I'm too old for this. And she's like, yeah, you don't know it yet, but you're going to become a yoga teacher. And sometimes someone sees your talent within you. And I had another creative that I know say to me, sometimes you may not be able to see what's in yourself, but other people see it. And you might know people like that. I'm sure you do, where you say, you missed your calling. You should have done this and you should have done that. But, but you can feel a little foolish if you're getting into the age game and you're thinking, I'm too old for this. So Susan's appalled that she discovered that she denied herself this figure skating that she did, and she's going out now to see if she still loves it. So she followed her curiosity. She bought a pair of skates, found a rink, hired a coach. She ignored the voice within that told her she was being self-indulgent and preposterous to do this crazy thing. She tamped down her feelings of extreme self-consciousness at being the only middle-aged woman, see what I mean, on the ice with all those tiny, feathery 9-year-old girls. She just did it. Go Susan. Here's where courage comes in at. 3 mornings a week, Susan awoke before dawn. In that groggy hour before her demanding day job began, she skated. Wow. And yes, she loved it as much as ever. She loved it even more than ever, perhaps, because now, as an adult, she finally had the perspective to appreciate the value of her own joy. Skating made her feel alive and ageless. She stopped feeling like she was nothing more than a consumer, nothing more than the sum of her daily obligations and duties. She was making something of herself, making something with herself. It was a revolution, a literal revolution, as she spun to life again on the ice. Revolution upon revolution upon revolution. Please note that my friend did not quit her job, did not sell her home, did not sever all her relationships and move to Toronto to study 70 hours a week with an exacting Olympic level skating coach. Oh no, the story does not end with her winning any championship medals. It doesn't have to. In fact, this story does not end at all, because Susan is still figure skating several mornings a week, simply because skating is still the best way for her to unfold a certain beauty and transcendence within her life that she cannot seem to access in any other manner, and she would like to spend as much time as possible in the state of such transcendence while she is still here on earth. That's all. That's what I call creative living. And while the paths and outcomes of creative living will vary widely from person to person, I can guarantee you this: a creative life is amplified life. That's what I just said. It amplifies. It moves things out of the way. It puts you on your path. A creative life is an amplified life. It's a bigger life, a happier life, an expanded life, and a hell of a lot more interesting life. Living in this manner, continually and stubbornly, bringing forth the jewels that are hidden within you, is a fine art in and of itself. See, this is why I don't like these things. Because creative living is where big magic will always abide. So what is it that you're doing that brings you so much joy that you have to just do it? You have to do it every day. You do it without thinking. It's interesting because Chantal and I were having this conversation yesterday in the member, I want to call it the member cafe, the member lounge. And I was like, when you get up in the morning, like, what do you do? Like, do you just like, are you a coffee girl or you're a tea girl? And what do you do? Do you just sit down and start diamond painting? And she's like, yes. And I do the same thing. Like, my whole routine's changed. And for a while there, I was feeling really guilty about the fact that I used to get up, wash my face, go into my room and do my yoga. And then I would come downstairs, or I would clean my upstairs, and then I would come downstairs, and then I would, you know, make the coffee and do the things. But I have this compulsion to just be at my desk. You know, I loved that I was out all day yesterday in the sunshine with all my friends and family and beautiful neighbors and new friends, and listening to beautiful music and drinking homemade wine and eating delicious food. But somewhere in the back of my mind, it's like this. It's like, it's this scratching. Diamond painting, diamond painting, diamond painting. I'm like, you need to have a life. You need to be out in the sun. You need to be doing some other things other than diamond painting. But no, I couldn't wait this morning. I almost did it last night, but I was just like, oh, I couldn't. My eyes were crossed when we came in from Vendemia. We had so much fun. Beautiful music, like I said. We had a great table that just brought homemade wine. We brought a beautiful charcuterie board, and like, just even, you know, was I just going to Vendemia? No, I was creating what I wanted to bring. And John created this beautiful charcuterie board. He cut up vegetables, he cut up cheeses, he cut up meats, I cut up fruit. I went and did, we created those pepper shooters. This is, I mean, you could go out and just go buy everything. I could have bought a charcuterie board, but no, we wanted to create it. We brought our things from home. We didn't buy like, you know, a charcuterie board. Very nice, you know, comes on a plastic platter. I mean, some of them are really nice, but we brought our own cutting board. We brought Italian bread. I mean, it was just, it was big magic at my table, because we had people that we invited that are the same way. They love to create wine and food, and who came with these beautiful long peppers that were done in a dehydrator, and the guys were eating them like the long hots. I fry them or I put them in the oven, but one of Victor's friends and Tommy's friends bought them he did them in a dehydrator, a big bag of them. Some of them were hot, some of them were sweet. They looked amazing, and the guys were just picking them up and eating them like chips. So that's the creative life amplified. That's what I mean. Like, it becomes a bigger part of your life, your creativity. You're doing this, but it's going into that little vault of where you pull your resources from when you're creating something else. The next little story by, I need a sip of this. I love that pumpkin pie spice. The next little story from Elizabeth Gilbert is called Scary, Scary, Scary. Let's talk about courage now. If you already have the courage to bring forth jewels that are hidden within you, terrific. You're probably already doing really interesting things with your life, and you don't need this book. Rock on. I can hear her saying it too, because I've listened to Elizabeth Gilbert. I love when an author writes a book and then sits down to read it and doesn't pass it off to Audible, even though there's some I mean, I have bought books because I've loved somebody's voice, and they bring a book to life. But I love when an author reads the book the way that she intended it to be heard. But if you don't have the courage, let's try to get you some. Because creative living is a path for the brave. We all know this, and we all know that when courage dies, creativity dies with it. We all know that fear is a desolate boneyard where our dreams go to desiccate in the hot sun. This is common knowledge. Sometimes we just don't know what to do about it. Let me list you some of the many ways in which you might be afraid to live a more creative life. You're afraid you have no talent. You're afraid you'll be rejected or criticized or ridiculed or misunderstood, or worst of all, ignored. I felt like that when I started my YouTube channel. You're afraid there's no market for your creativity and therefore no point in pursuing it. You're afraid somebody else already did it better. You're afraid everybody else already did it better. You're afraid someone will steal your ideas, so it's safer to keep them hidden forever in the dark. I can tell you that that doesn't happen. You're afraid you won't be taken seriously. You're afraid your work isn't politically, emotionally, or artistically important enough to change anyone's life. You're afraid your dreams are embarrassing. You're afraid that someday you'll look back on your creative endeavors as having been a giant waste of time, effort, and money. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of discipline. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of workspace or financial freedom or empty hours in which to focus on invention or exploration. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of training or degree. You're afraid you're too fat. I don't know what this has to do with creativity exactly, but experience has taught me that most of us are afraid we're too fat. So let's just put that on the anxiety list for good measure. You're afraid of being exposed as a hack or a fool or a dilettante or a narcissist. You're afraid of upsetting your family with what you may reveal. Big one. One tray done. Look how pretty they look. Can't wait to put all my little labels in there. And my little drills in there and put the labels on top. And I'll tell you, so much easier just to peel these labels off and try and pick those sticky labels off your containers, your drill containers. I soak mine in hot water and I'm still rubbing them with a microfiber. Next page. Wow, there's a lot of afraids here. You're afraid of what your peers and coworkers will say if you express your personal truth out loud. Absolutely. You're afraid of unleashing your innermost demons, and you really don't want to encounter your innermost demons. You're afraid your best work is behind you. You're afraid you never had any best work to begin with. You're afraid you neglected your creativity for so long that now you can never get it back. You're afraid you're too old to start. You're afraid you're too young to start. You're afraid because something went well in your life once, so obviously nothing can ever go well again. You're afraid because nothing has ever gone well in your life, so why bother trying? You're afraid of being a one-hit wonder. You're afraid of being a no-hit wonder. Listen, I don't have all day here, so I'm not going to keep listing fears. It's a bottomless list anyway, and a depressing one. I'll just wrap up my summary this way. Scary, scary, scary. Everything is so goddamn scary. I would love if this resonated with someone, if you would share. I mean, I think that there's so many topics of discussion from this one little conversation that I'm having here with the few short stories. And going back to Jack Gilbert, did you ever have someone say to you, like I know with Elizabeth, this was someone that she admired from afar, and she ended up taking a job the next year right after he had left, and not wanting to meet a hero. She wanted him to live through her imagination, which I get. Would you ever have someone say to you, you have a double? I have a girl living in this very city that people mistake for me all the time. And then when they see me, they're like, I thought I saw you, and we have never met each other. And I wonder, does she know about me? I'm sure she does, because I had someone walk up to me at a wedding, and I can't remember what they called me, but they called me by her name. And I was like, no. And they're like, oh my God, you have a double. I'm like, I would love to know where did you see this girl? Because I have to meet her. And even in the advent of Facebook and everybody, do you know this person and whatever, and we still have not come across one another yet. It made me think of that too when I was reading about having the same last name. I've never come across my name where I would be curious enough to say, oh, she has the same last name as me. Is she a relative? Like John's name is very common, Pescator. But my maiden name, Sokola or Chicola, is not. So I would be very curious if I met another Sokola, absolutely. Defending your weakness, Elizabeth writes. Please understand that the only reason I can speak so authoritatively about fear is that I know it so intimately. I was going to say, she probably listed all those. I mean, she really sat down and thought about things that you could be afraid of. She probably went through a few of them of her own. I know every inch of fear from head to toe. I've been a frightened person my entire life. I was born terrified. I'm not exaggerating. You can ask anyone in my family and they'll confirm that yes, I was an exceptionally freaked out child. My earliest memories are of fear. My earliest memories are of fear, as are pretty much all the memories that come after my earliest memories. Growing up, I was afraid not only of all the commonly recognized and legitimate childhood dangers, the dark, strangers, the deep end of the swimming pool, but I was also afraid of an extensive list of completely benign things. Snow, perfectly nice babysitters, cars, playgrounds, stairs, Sesame Street, the telephone, boarding games, the grocery store, sharp blades of grass, any new situation whatsoever, anything that dared to move, etc., etc., etc. Oh my gosh. I was a sensitive and easily traumatized creature who would fall into fits of weeping at any disturbance in her force field. My father, exasperated, used to call me Pitiful Pearl. We went to the Delaware shore one summer when I was 8 years old, and the ocean upset me so much that I tried to get my parents to stop all the people on the beach from going into the surf. I just would have felt a lot more comfortable if everyone had stayed safely on his or her own towel. Quietly reading. Was that too much to ask? Oh my gosh, she's so funny. If I had my way, I would have spent that entire vacation, indeed my entire childhood, indoors, snuggled on my mother's lap, in a low light, preferably with a cool washcloth on my forehead. This is a horrible thing to say, but here goes. I probably would have loved having one of those awful Munchausen syndrome by proxy mothers who could have colluded with me in pretending that I was externally sick, weak, and dying. I would have totally cooperated with that kind of mother in creating a completely helpless child, given half the chance. But I didn't get that kind of mother, not even close. Instead, I got a mother who wasn't having it. She wasn't having a minute of my drama, which is probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. My mother grew up on a farm in Minnesota, the proud product of tough Scandinavian immigrants. And she was not about to raise a little candy ass, not on her watch. My mother had a plan for turning around my fear that was almost comic in its straightforwardness. At every turn, she made me do exactly what I dreaded most. Scared of the ocean? Get in that ocean. Afraid of the snow? Time to go shovel snow. Can't answer the telephone? You are now officially in charge of answering the telephone in this house. Oh gosh. Hers was not a sophisticated strategy, but it was consistent. Trust me, I resisted her. I cried and sulked and deliberately failed. I refused to thrive. I lagged behind, limping and trembling. I would do almost anything to prove that I was emotionally and physically totally enfeebled. Oh my God. To which my mom was like, no, you aren't. Oh my gosh. Sounds like me. I mean, my son had some fears and I did the same thing to him. Like, you have to do this. You have to try. But I didn't say, you're afraid of the phone. You're going to answer the phone. Her mom said, no, you aren't. I spent years pushing back against my mother's unshakable faith in my strength and abilities. Well, that's why you do it. Yes, of course. If you have children and you see them are afraid of something, you help them work through it. But also, I've never heard a child this afraid of everything. It's kind of funny because she's just so, like I said in the beginning, she's just so real and she's so raw and she has the courage to put forth her fears this way. I spent years pushing back against my mother's unshakable faith in my strength and abilities. Then one day, somewhere in my adolescence, I finally realized that this was a really weird battle for me to be fighting. Defending my weakness? That's seriously the hill I want to die on? As the saying goes, argue for your limitations and you get to keep them. Oh, I love that. Why would I want to keep my limitations? I didn't, as it turned out. And I don't want you to keep yours either. Fear is boring. Over the years, I've often wondered what finally made me stop playing the role of pitiful Pearl. Almost overnight. Surely there were many factors involved in that evolution. The tough mom, the growing up factor, but mostly I think it was just this. I finally realized that my fear was boring. I think too, when you're young like that, I've had moments in my life where it just was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I just put my mind down to it. Now, in the years, it's never been that easy since when I was young. I keep waiting for that unshakable faith where it's like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I just don't do it. And I do it with no regard. I do it with no emotion. And by no emotion, I mean, I do it without thinking about it ever again. I do it without any anger where I'm dwelling on it. And I do it without any kind of thought whatsoever after. And I think that maybe that's just the beauty of doing something when you're young. Please, everything that I'm saying is open to discussion. And I hope that you do discuss this. Mind you, my fear had always been boring to everyone else, but it wasn't until mid-adolescence that it became, at last, boring even to me. My fear became boring to me, I believe, for the same reason that fame became boring to Jack Gilbert, because it was the same thing every day. Around the age of 15, I somehow figured out that my fear had no variety to it. No depth, no substance, no texture. I noticed that my fear never changed, never delighted, never offered a surprise, twist, or unexpected ending. My fear was a song with only one note. Only one word actually, and that word was stop. My fear never had anything more interesting or subtle to offer than that one emphatic word, repeated at full volume on an endless loop. Stop, 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 stop. Which means that my fear always made predictably boring decisions, like choose your own ending that will always have the same ending, nonetheless. I also realized that my fear was boring because it was identical to everyone else's fear. I figured out that everyone's song of fear has exactly the same tedious lyric. Stop, 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 stop. True, the volume may vary from person to person, but the song itself never changes because all of us humans were equipped with the same basic fear package when we were being knitted into our mother's wombs. And not just humans. If you pass your hand over a petri dish containing a tadpole, the tadpole will flinch beneath your shadow. The tadpole cannot write poetry, and it cannot sing, and it will never know love or jealousy or triumph. And it has a brain the size of a punctuation mark, but it damn sure knows how to be afraid of the unknown. Well, so do I. So do we all. But there's something particularly compelling about that. Do you see what I mean? You don't get any special credit, is what I'm saying, for knowing how to be afraid of the unknown. Fear is a deeply ancient instinct. In other words, an evolutionary vital one. But it ain't especially smart. For the entirety of my young and skittish life, I had fixated upon my fear as if it were the most interesting thing about me, when actually it was the most mundane. In fact, my fear was probably the only 100% mundane thing about me. I had creativity within me that was original. I had a personality within me that was original. I had dreams and perspectives and aspirations about me that were original, but my fear was not original in the least. My fear wasn't some kind of rare artisanal object. It was a mass-produced item available on the shelves of any generic box store. And that's the thing I wanted to build my entire identity around. The most boring instinct I possessed, the panic reflex of my dumbest inner tadpole? No. So while I was reading that, it made me think that she had this perspective of everyone has the same song, right? Fear comes at us. You could sit down with someone and you could talk about your anxiety and you could compare notes and it's exactly the same. Oh, my heart races, my hand sweats, I get a lightheaded feeling, I this, I that. But talk about what it is that's buried inside of you, your creativity and your perspective. Well, you could at times get the same from someone else, but here's where I'm thinking that that's different. If you value your individuality, I grew up and I had pitch black hair. No one in my neighborhood had pitch black hair. And I never felt insecure about that. I knew I was different. I knew I was unique. I knew that, and I knew that I loved that. I loved that perspective of being different and unique. And even my name. It wasn't until I got here that I met another Lisa. And she's one of my subscribers here. But when the 80s rolled around and punk rock and goth became a thing and everybody dyed their hair black, I was very aware of the fact that I fit in with everybody else. And I was no longer, and I think that you try to find other ways when you are an individual. I mean, I could have just joined punk rock and goth, but I wasn't going to because that was inside of me. I had to find other ways to stand out. And so I think that perspective of her saying, hey, you know what? This is the hill that I'm going to die on with everyone else that dies from fear. There's nothing exciting or individualistic about any of us other than we have the same kind of definition of what fear and anxiety is. And I don't know, maybe that, there are people that really suffer from deep anxiety. I know I did at one point, and when you don't get it treated and you can't get a handle on it, it turns into depression. And so I went through that too. But there was that unshakable moment where I said, I'm doing this, but I did it with like a tremor in my voice. I'm not living like this anymore. I'm doing this. I'm not going to give in to this. This is ridiculous. Like the same thing like Elizabeth. This is the hill I'm going to die on. Being afraid and wasting my time and energy being afraid of something that might happen that never does. It never does when you're afraid of something. It never does. Because we're creative. We're even creative in our anxiety and our fear. We create the most outlandish scenes that never happen. And so I thought to myself one day, I can create another outcome. You're going to get what you focus on, and you're going to get more of it. So start creating more good things. The fear you need and the fear you don't need. Now you're probably thinking I'm going to tell you that you must become fearless in order to live a more creative life. But I'm not going to tell you that because I don't happen to believe it's true. Creativity is a path for the brave, yes, but it is not a path for the fearless. And it's important to recognize the distinction. Bravery means doing something scary. I once had this discussion about being brave, what the difference between being brave and having courage. And I think sometimes, she says being brave is doing something that is scary. But I think that sometimes being brave can be reckless, whereas courage is something totally different. Fearlessness means not even understanding what the word scary means. If your goal in life is to become fearless, then I believe you're already on the wrong path, because the only truly fearless people I've ever met were straight up sociopaths and a few exceptionally reckless 3-year-olds. And those aren't role models for anyone. The truth is you need your fear for obvious reasons of basic survival. Evolution did well to install a fear reflex within you, because if you didn't have any fear, you would lead a sort of crazy, stupid life. You would walk into traffic, you would drift into the woods and be eaten by bears. You would jump into giant waves off the coast of Hawaii despite being a poor swimmer. You would marry a guy who said on the first date, I don't necessarily believe people were designed by nature to be monogamous. So yes, you absolutely do need your fear in order to protect you from actual dangers like the ones I've listed above. But do you need your fear in the realm of creative expression? Seriously, you don't. Just because you don't need your fear when it comes to creativity, of course, doesn't mean your fear won't show up. Trust me, your fear will always show up, especially when you're trying to be inventive or innovative. Your fear will always be triggered by your creativity because creativity asks you to enter into realms of uncertain outcome, and fear hates uncertain outcome. Your fear, programmed by evolution to be a hypervigilant and insanely overprotective, will always assume that any uncertain outcome is destined to end in a bloody, horrible death. Basically, your fear is like a mall cop who thinks he's a Navy SEAL. He hasn't slept in days, he's all hopped up on Red Bull, and he's liable to shoot his own shadow in an absurd effort to keep everyone safe. This is all totally natural and human. It's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. However, something that very much needs to be dealt with. And I believe in her own way, she was telling you the difference between courage and fear. And I do think that creativity and fear are like a yin and yang. And you have to have a yin and yang energy to everything in life. The road trip. Here's how I've learned to deal with my fear. I made a decision a long time ago that if I want a creative life, I made a decision a long time ago that if I want creativity in my life, and I do, then I will have to make space for fear too. There you go. Plenty of space. There you go. They go hand in hand. I decided that I would need to build an expansive enough interior life that my fear and my creativity could peacefully coexist, since it appeared that they would always be together. In fact, it seems to me that my fear and my creativity are basically conjoined twins, yin and yang, like I said, as evidenced by the fact that creativity cannot take a single step forward without fear marching right alongside it. Fear and creativity share a womb. They were born at the same time, and they still share some vital organs. This is why we have to be careful of how we handle our fear, because I've noticed that when people try to kill off their fear, they often end up inadvertently murdering their creativity in the process. And so I am going to say that this has been a journey for me in diamond painting. I had an extreme fear of confetti. I can't do it. I get overwhelmed. It's something that I'm born with. I get overwhelmed. I can't, everything becomes blurry. But here comes creativity holding fear's hand and saying, Elisa, when you're ready, you're going to devise a way to be creative about this and get over your fear of confetti. Is it starting to make sense to you now? Is it starting to make sense? Like, if you're here and you've been with me for a while on my channel, I think you've seen me grow and bloom into different ways of trying things and experimenting with things, and I become so excited about those things and I want to share them with you, and I give you all, as my teacher again once said, Karina, I give you all. So I don't try to kill off my fear. I don't go to war against it. Instead, I make all that space for it. Heaps of space. Every single day, I'm making space for fear right this moment. I allow my fear to live and breathe and stretch out its legs comfortably. It seems to me that the less I fight my fear, the less it fights back. If I can relax, fear relaxes too. In fact, I cordially invite fear to come along with me everywhere I go. I even have a welcoming speech prepared for fear, which I deliver right before embarking upon any new project or big adventure. Well, I am right here for all of that. It goes something like this. Dearest Fear, creativity and I are about to go on a road trip together. I understand you'll be joining us, because you always do. I acknowledge that you believe you have an important job to do in my life and that you take your job seriously. Apparently, your job is to induce complete panic whenever I'm about to do something interesting. And may I say, you are superb at your job. So by all means, keep doing your job if you feel you must. But I will also be doing my job on this road trip, which is to work hard and stay focused. And creativity will be doing its job, which is to remain stimulating and inspiring. There's plenty of room in this vehicle for all of us, so make yourself at home. But understand this, creativity and I are the only ones who will be making any decisions along the way. I recognize and respect that you are part of this family, and so I will never exclude you from our activities, but still, your suggestions will never be followed. You're allowed to have a seat, and you're allowed to have a voice, but you are not allowed to have a vote. You are not allowed to touch the road maps. You're not allowed to suggest detours. You're not allowed to fiddle with the temperature. Dude, you're not even allowed to touch the radio. But above all else, my dear old familiar friend, You are absolutely forbidden to drive. Then we head off together, me and creativity and fear, side by side, forever advancing once more into the terrifying but marvelous terrain of unknown outcome. I love her. I love the way she writes. I love that she gets me to, like, it's someone else's perspective on fear of, like, saying, yeah, you could come on this road trip with me, but you're not touching the radio. Don't talk about the air conditioner. You're not, and you most importantly are not allowed to drive. What a way of putting fear in its place. You don't get rid of it. It's there. It's there to be a roadmap to, you know, help you in your intuition, but not to take over the steering wheel. I love it. I love these stories. And I forgot this book, and I thought it would be a good book to read because I love Elizabeth Gilbert. I just absolutely adore her. I adore her writing. I read The Signature of All Things because I love her and because she went to one of our old mansions that we have here. I believe they're in Germantown Avenue. I did go to see them once, and it's a shame because there's just no way to protect and keep these mansions going unless you are, you know, have mega amounts of money and you want to restore one of these homes. And she was writing The Signature of All Things, and it takes place in Philadelphia. It has to do with, oh gosh, it's so interesting. A family, an importer, an exporter, voyages at sea, pirates, it's just so interesting, and it has to do with botanicals and bringing plant life from other countries here. And it was a book that, it was so huge, and I didn't want it to end, and I might read that again on my own. It would be too much for me to read here. We go on and on and on and on and on, but what a book. It's just a rich storyteller, and to write it like most good writers do when they're collecting their evidence and their information. She rented one of these old Philadelphia mansions to write, and I also admire her discipline that she writes and like we do, like me and Chantel do. We get up in the morning, we pour our coffee, and we're at our desks and we're diamond painting. And this is why I also want you to, you know, join the conversation. Tell me what you think. Tell me if any of this talk about creativity or heroes sparked something in you that you want to share, so that we can, you know, keep this going. Like Elizabeth said, and like I said, the creativity can be boundless. It'll just keep, it's like an echo that just keeps expanding outward into your own life, but also into everyone else's. We're creating the world that we want to live in, and we're creating the world that we want to live in when we're here too, on Elisa Marie Designs and in the lounge, you know, with the members. And so please join if you haven't joined already. It's such, you know, I'm speaking to now like maybe 500 members, but I feel like I am a different person when I am in my membership lounge, and I'm talking to a few of you one-on-one. And my husband has perfect timing because he went out for a bike ride and now he's back. And so keep creating that world, join the conversation, and please, please, please keep creating that world that you want to live in. And I will see you tomorrow. No, I won't. I'll see my members tomorrow for Member Monday. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Thank you and goodbye.